Why does the church need this book today? Well, it's a wonderful book in exalting Christ as high priest, so the only mediator between us and God. And in our society today, people are saying there are lots of different paths to God, and it doesn't really matter what you believe. And the message of Hebrews cuts clean against that, and we need to hear it, that Christ is unique. He is God's final word to us. He's God's ultimate revelation. And he is the high priest God has given us, so he's the only one through whom we can have access to God the Father. And so we need to hear this message that we've got to stick with him. And the other reason we need the book is the warnings, that in no book in the Bible are there such clear warnings as we find in the book of Hebrews. And again, I think that's a message we need today, that encouragement biblically involves not just a hand on the shoulder and comforting people. It is that, but it's also warning people. And we need to be warned of the serious consequences of drifting away from Christ and neglecting this great salvation. So those are two big reasons why we need the book today just as much as they did back then. The book of Hebrews is a bit unusual in how it starts, in that we're not told who wrote it, unlike in other New Testament letters. The only clue we have is that when you get to the last chapter, chapter 13, it's clear that the author knew Timothy. But that's about as far as it goes, and it doesn't narrow it down that much. In terms of when it was written, it was certainly written by the end of the first century. So a guy called Clement of Rome, who's writing in 96 AD, he quotes from the letter and he refers to it, so it must have been written by then. As for who it was written to, the title in our Bibles, Hebrews, is not original. We're not told who it was written to, so again, unusual compared to other New Testament letters. It doesn't say from so-and-so to so-and-so. But when you read through it, it's apparent that it was written to Christians who had become Christians from a Jewish background. So there is an awful lot in the letter about the Jewish Old Testament sacrificial system. It's assuming a knowledge of that. So it's apparent that it was written to people who'd come to faith in Christ from a Jewish background, and who were tempted to return to Judaism. And the reason for this is that they were finding it too hard following Christ. And so the message of the book is they've got to keep going with Christ. Because of who he is and what he's done, their only hope is to stick with him. If I was to pick one verse that sums up the message of Hebrews, I'd go for Hebrews 2 verse 3, which says, "How shall we escape if we neglect such a great salvation?" And I think that verse sums it up, because it's got these two themes in there of, on the one hand, the greatness of salvation, that it is immense, it's staggering, the privileges we enjoy as New Testament believers now. So direct access to God through Christ in a way that Old Testament believers could only have dreamt about. So the greatness of salvation, but also this warning, and the really strong warning, that how shall we escape if we neglect it? So we've got to keep going with Christ. We mustn't be tempted away by those who say, well, it doesn't matter what you believe. And if we're going through hard times, if we're feeling weary in the Christian race, we need to keep going. And that picture of a race is one that we find in chapter 12 of Hebrews. It says that we're running this race, we need to run with endurance. Lots of people do marathons. Marathons is a good picture of the Christian life that we find in Hebrews. It's not a sprint, it's a long distance race. And if we're feeling weary, we need the encouragement and the warnings of Hebrews to keep going and to pick up our feet and to go towards the finish line.